My name's Cody, I'm 35, and up until a few weeks ago, my life was as normal as it gets. That all changed when I noticed this guy standing under my apartment window. At first, I brushed it off. Big city life, right? Weird stuff happens all the time. But then he was there again the next day and the day after that, always just standing there looking up at my window. It was creepy, sure, but I figured he'd get bored and move on. Except he didn't. I started seeing him everywhere. When I left for work in the morning, he'd be across the street. During my lunch break, I'd spot him outside the cafe. Even when I went to grab groceries, he somehow ended up in the same aisle. It felt like he was following me, but every time I tried to approach him, he'd just vanish. I thought I was losing my mind. It got to the point where I was looking over my shoulder constantly, jumping at shadows. My friends noticed I was off. But what was I supposed to say? Hey, there's this guy stalking me, but I can't prove it, and I don't even know what he wants. They'd think I was nuts. Nights were the worst. Every little noise had me convinced he'd finally decided to break in. I barely slept, and when I did, it was with a baseball bat next to my bed. The lack of sleep started messing with me at work. My boss even pulled me aside to ask if everything was okay at home. How do you explain that your life's turned into some sort of horror movie cliche? I considered going to the police, but I didn't have anything solid. There's a guy who stands around a lot, isn't exactly compelling evidence. Plus, I didn't want to be that guy. Paranoid over nothing, except it didn't feel like nothing. It felt like I was being hunted, but for what? I couldn't begin to guess. After a couple of weeks of this, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to do something, anything, to shake this guy. So I started mixing things up, changed my routine, took different routes to work, even started going to a new coffee shop on the other side of town. For a few days, it seemed to work. I didn't see him anywhere, and I started to feel like maybe I'd been overreacting. Maybe he was just some weirdo with too much time on his hands, and now he'd found a new hobby. But then, just when I started to relax, he popped up again. This time, right outside the new coffee shop. It was like he never lost track of me at all. That really got under my skin. How did he find me? Was he following me that closely? It made me realize this wasn't just some coincidence or casual stalking. This guy was determined for reasons I couldn't fathom. I tried to be smart about it, started leaving my phone at home in case he was tracking me that way. I even borrowed a friend's car to throw him off. But it was like he was a ghost. No matter what I did, he would reappear, a silent shadow that clung to my life with an inexplicable fixation. My friends started noticing how jumpy I was getting. I brushed off their concern with lame excuses. But how do you explain you're trying to outmaneuver a stalker who's like smoke? You can't grab him, can't confront him. You can just try to avoid him, and even that doesn't work. It became a game of cat and mouse, except it wasn't a game, and I had no idea what would happen if the cat caught up. I installed a new lock on my apartment door, checked my windows every night, and yet every shadow made my heart race. Every unexpected sound was him finally deciding to make his move. The stress was getting to me, making me see him in crowds where he wasn't, jumping at cars that looked like his. It was exhausting, living in constant high alert, analyzing every face, doubting every stranger. My life had shrunk down to this constant evasion, a daily battle to stay one step ahead of a threat I didn't understand. But the worst part, the sinking feeling that no matter what I did, it wasn't going to be enough. That eventually he'd get tired of the chase and decide it was time to catch me, and I had no idea what to do when that day came. My apartment now felt like a cage. The walls closed in on me, each creak a reminder of my vulnerability. I began to avoid going home, staying out late under the guise of work or aimless wandering. Anything to delay the moment when I'd have to face the silence and the fear waiting for me there. But evasion wasn't a solution. It was a temporary bandage over a festering wound. The feeling of being watched, followed, persisted. Shadows clung tighter, turning the mundane into the menacing. A figure half seen out of the corner of my eye would send my heart racing, a cold sweat breaking out over my skin. More than once I found myself running, not sure if I was being pursued or if I was merely a prisoner of my own panic. The descent into paranoia was swift. I started seeing him, not just in shadows or reflections, but in dreams. He never spoke, just watched, his gaze an accusation, a reminder of the confrontation that never was. Sleep, when it came, offered no respite, just a different stage for this torment to unfold. My social life disintegrated. Friends, sensing a change they couldn't understand, began to keep their distance. I couldn't blame them. Conversations were minefields. I was either too withdrawn or too eager to scan our surroundings, looking for signs of him. Work suffered too. My concentration was shattered. Tasks left incomplete as I lost hours caught in a loop of worry and fear. The turning point came one evening when I returned home to find my door ajar. For a moment, I stood frozen on the threshold. Every horror story I'd ever heard playing in rapid succession in my mind. With a deep breath, I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The relief at finding everything seemingly in place quickly turned to ash when I noticed small, almost imperceptible changes. A book misplaced, a chair slightly askew. The message was clear. He had been here, in my sanctuary, erasing any illusion of safety I had clung to. That night, as I sat in the middle of my living room, lights blazing to chase away the shadows, I realized how far I had fallen. My life had become a cycle of fear. The man who haunted my every step had not just invaded my life, he had transformed it into a living nightmare. I was alone, truly alone, caught in a descent that threatened to consume me. The realization was as cold as it was stark. There was no easy way out, no quick fix. After weeks of this cat and mouse game of feeling like a pawn in some sick strategy I couldn't comprehend, the truth finally hit me. It was late, another sleepless night spent staring at the ceiling, when I heard it, a soft, almost imperceptible noise coming from my living room. My first thought was, this is it. He's finally made his move. Every fiber of my being screamed to stay put, to call the police, but I had to know. If this was going to end, it might as well be on my terms. I grabbed the baseball bat by my bed and moved silently towards the sound. I barely had time to react. The figure that burst into the dim light of my living room was both foreign and hauntingly familiar. A mirror image twisted by rage and intent. There was no conversation, no moment of revelation, just the glint of a knife in the hand of my doppelganger as he lunged at me. The fight was brutal and desperate. He was like me in every physical aspect, but his movements were driven by a dark fury I didn't understand. The knife found its mark more than once, slicing through my flesh, painting sharp lines of agony across my body. But survival, that most basic instinct, took over. We grappled, overturned furniture, shattered glass. My living space turned into a battlefield. In the chaos, I managed to turn the knife against him. The look in his eyes as he realized what was happening was something I'll never forget. A mix of shock, betrayal, and a deep, unspoken pain. When he fell, it was almost in slow motion, the knife protruding awkwardly from his chest. Silence descended, punctuated only by my ragged breathing and the distant wail of sirens. The police found me there, a mess of confusion and fear. I tried to explain, but how could I? How do you tell someone that you've been stalked by yourself, that you've just fought for your life against your own mirror image? They didn't believe me, of course. It sounded insane, even to my own ears. I was taken into custody, the bloody knife sealed in an evidence bag, my apartment cordoned off as a crime scene. The investigation that followed unraveled the horrifying truth. My attacker, my mirror image, was Austin, my twin brother. We had been separated as children, me whisked away to a life with foster parents, him left behind in the orphanage. Austin was left behind, his days marked by the shadows of neglect and the coldness of abandonment. The bitterness and resentment of a life spent in shadows had festered in him, warping his love into something dark and twisted. He had sought me out not for reunion, but for revenge. He blamed me for his misery, for every bad hand life had dealt him, and he had decided to claim my life as his own. The plan was simple yet horrific. Kill me, dispose of my body, and step into my place, erasing me from existence. There was no trial. The truth of our connection, of the life stolen from Austin and the innocence lost to me, painted a tragedy no law could judge. I was released, but the freedom tasted bitter. Austin's plan to kill me and take my place, to erase the life he believed should have been his, ended with his death. But the revelation of our shared past tore open wounds my mind has sealed deep inside. I was free, but freedom meant living with the knowledge of what I had lost, what I had unknowingly left behind. In killing Austin, I had silenced the only other witness to my beginning, the only one who knew the price of the happiness I had taken for granted.